Boy, do we have a lot to get to this week. First off, there's a liquidity crisis brewing, and it's not the kind that involves my increasing devotion to bourbon. Tomi Lahren wishes that she had a crystal ball to avoid what happened on her YouTube channel this week. Bad Bunny has some bad news for Kristi Noem. I have a second thought on black sites. There's gold in them thar hills. Elon's cuck Stephen Miller is feeling his oats. Mike Little Johnson grinders away at the government shutdown. And pervy masked men in Chicago zip-tie naked kids because they're just so gosh darn tough. Also, we turned 5 years old this week. That's right, the UNFTR podcast started 5 years ago this week. And of course, Donald Trump declares war on American citizens, drug cartels in Mexico, the whole of Venezuela, free speech, and the English language as well.
Said, well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen.
All in pursuit of the Nobel Peace Prize. You're watching UNFTR, and we are on the record for the week of October 6, 2025. UNFTR! Well, good morning, unfuckers. Let's start with a little light sports news, shall we? Last night, the Toronto Blue Jays continued their hitting clinic against the New York Yankees, taking a 2-0 series lead. It's all very confusing for me as someone who was born in Canada and raised in New York and a lifelong Mets fan, which means I don't care because why is anybody even playing baseball in October? That's simply not a thing that we do. Now, in related sports news in New York, MAGA-owned New York Jets took a beating from MAGA-owned America's team, Dallas Cowboys. And I gotta say, this MAGA-on-MAGA violence has just got to stop. And as a long-suffering Jets fan, all I can say to my 0-5, haven't won a Super Bowl in my lifetime MAGA owner Woody Johnson, please sell the team. You're very, very bad at this. And since we're talking football, this snowflake right is up in arms about Bad Bunny being selected to perform at the Super Bowl halftime show. Now listen, I can make the case for SNL this weekend that maybe he shouldn't be hosting a comedy show, but he's not doing stand-up at the Super Bowl, so it should be fine. But because he's a Latino artist who's been reluctant to perform in the continental U.S. for some reason that I can't imagine, the whole thing has the right pretty butthurt. Kristi Noem, official White House dog trainer and still the worst Barbie ever, appeared on the Benny Johnson podcast and said this about the NFL. Quote, "They suck and will win, and God bless us." I'm not sure she knows how football works. Anywho, she said the Super Bowl will be crawling with ice. And here's the thing. The average price of a Super Bowl ticket last year was around $6,000, so I can only imagine that she's hunting for Saudi princes who have overstayed their visas. Now, in further football news, progressive queen Krystal Ball found herself in the frozen wasteland of the far right, threatened by the frosty tips of right-wing has-been Tomi Lahren, and did what any good leader of the Rebel Alliance would do. Gutted her like a tauntaun, then crawled inside her carcass to take a wee little nap and warm up before emerging to bask in the sunlight of victory. As the top commenter on the episode said, Tomi made the mistake of inviting someone with a fully functional brain on her show. Now, the best part came at the end when Lahren tried to criticize Bad Bunny for playing the halftime show at the Super Bowl. And well, listen for yourself.
Let's go to the videotape.
Do you think Bad Bunny's a good choice for the Super Bowl?
I'm not that knowledgeable about him, but it seems fine, and I don't know why it's a big deal. Seems like a great American artist, so sure.
He's not an American artist, but
he's Puerto Rican. That's part of America, dear.
Let's just say this is exactly what to expect from the GOP geography in our schools these days. Now, the big news to watch for this week is that the president has called up the California National Guard to invade Portland, Oregon, which is a move that Governor Winsome Loosum Handsome Newsom has promised to sue over. But quite frankly, I don't even understand how any of this works anymore. Between Hegseth calling his generals fat and Trump calling up reserves to invade our own cities, something tells me we're doing this wrong. In all seriousness, if you're not already following Ken Klippenstein, then start. Ken's getting a ton of recognition these days, and deservedly so. And one of the things that he's sounding the alarm about is Trump's new NSPM 7 memorandum, which is being mistakenly referred to by the mainstream media as an executive order. It's not. These kinds of orders are very rare and taken very seriously among federal officials. And this one might be the worst example of overreach since the Alien and Sedition Acts because it targets individuals or groups with counterterrorism measures based on loosely defined criteria such as being anti-Christian, anti-capitalist, hostile toward American values and beliefs, and so on. This is not a drill. And I'll leave a link in the description because Ken is definitely worth a follow. Oh yeah, and I made a prediction last week that the government was definitely going to shut down. So, yay me. All right, time for Max Notes. And then we're going to get into Killer Left Take of the Week, Chart of the Week, Headlines, and I'll leave you with a book and podcast recommendation as usual. So as I mentioned up top, there's a liquidity crisis brewing in the financial markets, and this is going to take me a little bit to get through, so bear with me. At some point, this crisis is going to bleed out and wreak havoc in the financial markets. It's just a question of when and where it's going to appear. Now, the upshot is that the banking sector is going to be fine this time around because they're playing with the house's money and they have mechanisms that were put in place in the wake of the global financial crisis to handle this exact type of catastrophe. But at some point in the very near future, the Federal Reserve is going to have to print gobs and gobs of money, and everyone knows it. And this is where things get a little hairy. As we kick off Q4 of 2025, we're also flying blind on government data, with the typical releases being halted due to the government shutdown. And we have more questions than answers from the data dumps at the end of Q3. So we do know that we have persistent inflation and that it's going to keep going up based on the manufacturing and services data inputs. We also know that the labor market is going to continue to soften. So there's more layoffs and people are out of work for longer. And the Challenger report just showed that there are maybe mass layoffs being planned in the coming months. So the last visuals that we had on the economy were pretty rough, but now we're flying blind through a storm with no visibility. So one thing that we will be able to see is treasury market activity. And that will provide a few clues about the balancing act of the Trump administration and what they're attempting to pull off because deficits are eating away at our cash reserves. In fact, the Treasury just finished a record-setting short-term auction of more than $100 billion to pad its own checking account, something called the TGA, or Treasury General Account. And the reason it had to do this is because the Fed's checking account is all but depleted at the moment, and we have trillions of dollars due before the end of the year that we simply don't have. Bank reserves have also fallen, not as much, but they've fallen below $3 trillion for the first time in many, many years because the Fed is continuing a policy of what it calls quantitative tightening. It's trying to reduce its balance sheet and clear the way to maybe start hoarding some cash because it has to. So at the end of Q3, the Fed did feel some pressure in the overnight settlement markets. Now, we talked about this before. This is the repo market. Now, this was created in the wake of the financial crisis also to make sure that there was enough liquidity in the whole system. So you've got trades, trillions of dollars of trades happening every single day. Buyers and sellers settling on certain amounts with promises that notes are going to get paid. And there's banks in the middle of that that provide the cash to guarantee those settlements just in case something happens overnight. On the rarest of occasions, there's not enough money in the financial system, and that's what happened in 2019 unexpectedly. So what the Fed has been doing is building up some reserves to make sure that it's ready to inject that liquidity even faster, and they do it like this. They do it in an instant. They just print the money and send it into the system. Now, everybody knew that the end of Q3 was going to be one of those times when there might be pressure on liquidity in the market, and there was. More so than they even thought because they were prepared for it and still had to inject a new $5 billion into the market. But that wasn't the kind of chilling part. Not only did they have to put $5 billion into the market to keep it flowing, which happens, they had to keep it flowing for a couple of days. And that's unusual. Now, if this all sounds a bit wonky, here's how I look at it. Money circulates, let's say, between friends and family of the U.S. government. The Fed does business with family. Those are the banks. The Treasury does business with friends all over the world, corporations, other governments, sovereign wealth funds, family offices, hedge funds, etc. So like a good head of a family, the Fed lets family members sit on a whole bunch of money at very favorable rates. The Treasury loans money to everyone, friends and family alike, at slightly higher rates. Now, at the moment, the government does need money for its own bills. So it's looking to get back some of that family money that it's been lending out, and even more money that we've lent out to friends and family alike. The problem is, not everyone is so keen to part with their funds and give it to the US government right now, because they're starting to think that maybe we're a little over our skis and we might have a drinking problem. As a result, in order to bring more money into the government, both the Fed and the Treasury are having to lend at the high end of their rate thresholds. Then there's this formula: nonsensical tariff war, plus huge deficits, plus government shutdown, plus insane head of state, plus destabilizing foreign policy, plus concerns about Fed independence, plus everyone realizing that they can get by without the United States equals a devalued dollar. Now, as you'll see in the chart of the week, gold is at an all-time high. So silver, by the way. Our treasury auctions are getting bigger and bigger, and the interest rates aren't budging. That's a bad sign. See, companies are beginning to revise earnings forecasts, and the Challenger job report indicates that we've got major cutbacks that might turn into mass layoffs. So a weak dollar means that everything that we import is more expensive on top of the ridiculous tariffs. So we're heading into a stretch of worse inflation and worse employment figures. So the first break in the dam, outside of the repo markets needing some cash and liquidity, has already happened in the subprime auto loan market.
Two high-profile bankruptcies in the auto finance space leading to a broad-based sell-off in the publicly traded alternatives firms. Tricolor and First Brands bankruptcies, each within the last few weeks, have shed a new light on the risks of over-leverage and subprime borrowers. Hedge fund manager Jim Chano slamming private credit in an interview with the Financial Times, saying, quote, "I suspect we're going to see more of these things like First Brands and others when the cycle ultimately reverses." He said the $2 trillion private credit sector is akin to the packaging of subprime mortgages during the 2008 crisis because of the, quote, layers of people in between the source of money and the use of money.
So Tricolor, one of the largest subprime auto lenders, just filed for bankruptcy. And while this might seem contained, remember, that's what they said about the subprime housing market in 2007. Oh, it's just the bottom end of the market. It's not a big deal. Until it is. And that's the concern right now. See, it's not just about what we can see in the treasury markets, which is not great, or the capital flight to non-dollar denominated assets like gold, which is not great. It's not even flying blind with no data during the shutdown. It's this massively leveraged private credit market estimated to be between $1.5 and $2 trillion, which is up from $1 trillion in just 2020. This market is incredibly opaque, and we only catch glimpses of it when lenders like Tricolor disclose their losses in bankruptcy, or when more money is needed in the overnight settlement markets than anticipated. So if what we can see doesn't look good, it's hard to imagine that the stuff we can't see looks any better. All right, with that, let's get to Killer Left Take of the Week. KLTW goes to JT Chapman of Second Thought, a channel devoted to education and analysis of current events from a socialist perspective. Second Thoughts is an incredible channel, and JT is a really smart and patient host. He's also an incredible creator. He's like a more subdued Johnny Harris, but with a socialist mind. Anyway, this week he digs into CIA black sites to set the stage for what deportees to El Salvador are very likely facing, and in some cases, verifiably experiencing. Here's a clip.
Fast forward to today. Abrego Garcia was one of 237 men sent to CICOT earlier this year. At CICOT, an El Salvadorian prison billed as a terrorism confinement center, torture looks much the same as it has these past 25 years. Inmates' heads are shaved when they arrive, they're handcuffed and stuffed into already overcrowded cells, they're beaten for days at a time with wooden batons, woken up at 4 a.m., denied medical care and showers, shot with rubber bullets, forced to kneel for hours until they pass out, sexually assaulted, filmed by guards delighting in their pain, and as always, denied access to legal counsel or any semblance of due process.
I'll leave a link to the description to watch the whole video, and even though they certainly don't need the help with more than 1.7 million subscribers, I still hope you subscribe. All right, now for Chart of the Week. You know who's probably pretty pissed off right now? Bob Menendez. If he was free, and still had the 13 gold bars that the feds took off his hands, he'd be sitting on $1.6 million worth of gold. And that's because the price of gold hit a record high. Also, this is a really bad sign, like we said before, because it means one of two things, or both. First, people are fleeing from other liquid or speculative assets because they think the global economy is about to take a shit. And second, it means investors are losing confidence in the U.S. Treasury bond. Now, this isn't a financial advice channel, so I would never tell you to buy something like gold. But is it a waste of time to rifle through your grandparents' basement for a gold bar that might have found its way back in the bottom of a rucksack from the war? Okay, quick shout out to our new and returning members who make this thing hum. We've got CJ, MJ, J-Wade, K-Mac, Durangutan, and Renata. And as you heard right at the top of the episode, while we're newer to YouTube, our beloved little podcast turns 5 years old on October 9th this week. And because we don't gate any of our content and refuse to take sponsorship or advertising, this thing of ours is entirely member-supported. And right now, we're at about 440 people. That's it. 440 people to keep this whole thing going, and they're doing all the heavy lifting. So if you want to pitch in, we would certainly welcome a one-time birthday donation, or even better, a membership. Just go to UNFTR.com for more information on how to support us. Time for some headlines. Our first one comes from Common Dreams, and the piece is titled, White House Responds with Authoritarian Propaganda as Judge Blocks National Guard in Portland. So suffice to say, Stephen Miller's feeling his oats right now. His mass deportation plan is moving right along. He routinely holds court with reporters outside of the White House. He gets off on cucking while Elon Musk... Whoa! Sorry. Well, he's really pushing the envelope this time by accusing a federal judge of insurrection because he didn't like her ruling. This is the type of behavior that does come back to haunt people in power, though. I'd love a front row seat for his comeuppance. Now, it might take a long time, but it always happens. Unless you're Henry Kissinger. Then you get to live for like 1,000,000 years. Anyway, here's a clip from the article. Quote, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff accused U.S. District Judge Karen Immergut, who was appointed by President Donald Trump during his first term, of legal insurrection after she found that the president's claims about violent protests at a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Portland were untethered to facts, and that residents' expressions of opposition to ICE do not meet the high legal standard for calling the National Guard. Shades of Ronald Reagan in this next piece from The Intercept titled, Trump Calls Cartel Members Terrorists. They're armed with bullets from a U.S. Army factory. Where the heck is old Ollie North these days, anyway? Now, for anyone interested in the origins of the CIA drug trade and the formations of cartels in Latin America, look up Gary Webb and his Dark Alliance series. Also, American Made, totally underrated Tom Cruise film. I have no idea how faithful it is to the actual storyline, but it's a good flick. Back to the story at hand. If Trump does illegally invade Mexico to fight the cartels, our guys will be shot at with our own artillery. Like I said, revisit Gary Webb. And here's an excerpt. Quote, if the U.S. military does confront the cartels in Mexico, it will find itself facing battle with its own weapons. An investigation by The Intercept traced the bullets that littered the ground in El Guayabo to at least 2 U.S. firearms manufacturers, one of which operates a massive factory owned by the U.S. military. Rounding out headlines this time from Mother Jones, we've got the Supreme Court just took legal status from 300,000 Venezuelans. And sure, why not? I mean, troops are on the way to Oregon right now. They're in Chicago already. Inexperienced masked agents of chaos from ICE are carrying out raids in apartment buildings, car washes, Home Depot parking lots. This is all happening. Quote, just this week, the American people saw images of an ICE raid on a Chicago apartment building with a significant Venezuelan population. Citizens had their doors bashed in and were zip-tied for hours, pulled from their apartments in the middle of the night. Mothers were separated from children, and children were zip-tied to each other, some naked. All right, let's finish out with Book Love and Pod Love. The podcast recommendation for this week is Drilled, and the episode title is The Media as a Tool of Climate Obstruction. The description says, obstruction would never have been as effective as it has been without the help of the PR industry and the willful ignorance of the media. Now, I got to tell you, I don't listened to Drilled enough, but every time I do, I am reminded of just how good it is. So definitely download that. It's on all of the podcast apps if you haven't done it already. And for book club this week, we've got The Bending Cross, the biography of none other than Eugene v. Debs by Ray Ginger. So this is a classic biography. It's one of the most important thinkers and activists in the United States. It was originally published in 1947 and then updated with a foreword in 2007, but it's more timely than ever. There is still so much that we can learn from this indefatigable figure who transformed American politics and forced unions and politicians alike to shift their thinking and their policies to the left. All right, I'll leave links to all of it in the notes below. Don't forget to email us at unftrpod@gmail.com or post a happy birthday message to the team and give a shout out to 99 and Manny Faces because we're all turning 5 together. I've got a recent video up on Midas Touch as well, covering the $20 billion bailout of Argentina while we bail on the U.S. farmers, so check that one out when you have time. And thanks to the unfuckers who've been here all along. Thanks to the newer Midas Mighty for taking a chance on us as well. This was On the Record for the week of October 6, 2025. I'll catch you online.